Sir, my question is relating to the hadith. There is a hadith of the Prophet prohibiting the Sahaba from spreading his sayings, but that was only during the time that the Quran was being revealed, as you have
Mm-hmm.
several times stated. Later on, he said that you can now spread my word, but
Mm-hmm.
just be careful that if anybody attributes something falsely to me, he has a house prepared in hell for himself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Dr. Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq is possibly the only person who has spent the longest period of time with the Prophet, both before his prophethood and
Mm-hmm.
right up to the end. He is reported to have compiled a small booklet of the
Mm-hmm.
hadith and gave it to his daughter, and next day in the morning asked it to be brought to him, and he burnt it,
Right.
saying that he feared that
Mm-hmm.
he might attribute something wrongly to the Prophet.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mm-hmm.
on the other hand, we have Hazrat Abu Huraira, who became a
Mm-hmm.
Muslim in the 7th century, 7th Hijri,
Mm-hmm.
and spent less than 4 years with the Prophet. But he
Mm-hmm.
is reported to have narrated about 5,000 plus hadiths.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they've been repeated and the number could be slightly lower. And then
Mm-hmm.
also, I heard Hamidi Saab mentioning that he used to hold regular daily sessions during the time of Hazrat Usman,
Mm-hmm.
narrating hadiths every evening to those who came to listen to
Mm-hmm.
him. And once he was asked that if did you also do this same practice during the time of Hazrat Umar, he said I would have been skinned alive if I had done it during the time of Umar.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how do we take it? Number one is Hazrat Abu Bakr. He knew that what was restraining him was the saying of the Prophet that if anybody falsely attributes something to me,
Mm-hmm.
but yet he didn't, allow publish that book. And on the other hand, Abu Huraira, who spent less than 4 years narrating 5,000 hadiths, which is 1,000 hadiths a year for every year that he spent. That means about 4 or 5 hadiths per day. How do we take the hadiths coming down to us from Hazrat Abu Huraira?
Well, I think we have to view our hadith with a pinch of salt, and meaning that you see, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was extremely careful and maybe very precautious because he thought that maybe something that he has heard from the Prophet may not be, uh, absolutely the same as he might have understood. Because remember, a lot of hadiths that we have today, they are not verbatim. They are not, cited in the same words. So it's basically the understanding of the narrator that is transmitted. So this makes people very anxious, and I think a person like Abu Bakr was right in this regard because being the first companion of the Prophet and like a lifelong companion, in fact, he knew that although he was like with him like a shadow, but still because he was narrating many things out of his own you can say memory or understanding, so there could have been some difference. But having said that, we still have narratives from Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. You can see them in various books of hadith, and so it's not. What you can say is that he did, burn the personally compiled anthology. But on the other hand, there are about 40 to 50 narratives which we still find in the Musnad of Ahmad ibn Hanbal and other books that are attributed to him and in which he is actually narrating something from the Prophet. So yes, it could be it's like a mixture of being very cautious that if you're responsible for something, then you feel overcautious. But when other people are narrating from you what you're saying, then obviously it is the responsibility of other people as well. And Abu Huraira or other people like Abdullah ibn Umar or even Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha, so these are narrators who cited scores of narratives on the Prophet. And that too is something which is very, I would say, helpful because the knowledge of the Prophet was transmitted through these narratives. Had nothing been transmitted, religion would have still been preserved because the Quran and Sunnah are the original sources. And this is what Abu Bakr made assured. He was assured because if he even narrates nothing from his own self, he knew that there are other people narrating, and he also knew that the Quran and Sunnah, which are the original sources, they are absolutely preserved. So other narrators like Abu Huraira and, as I said, some of the other Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Umar, etc. So they transmitted a very large quantity of the knowledge of the Prophet, which was very helpful, because one of the greatest things that we have got to know from these hadith literature is the ijtihads of the Prophet himself, how he would at times take a certain decision when he would not find an explicit directive of religion available to him. And there are scores of examples of his ijtihadat or his ijtihads which are cited in hadith literature. But in effect, you can also say that because this hadith literature is something about whom every knowledgeable scholar of religion knew that they are not going to be accepted per se. They will be critically evaluated, they will be critically analyzed, and only if the transmitted thing is understood to be in accordance with the Quran, Sunnah, established principles, intellect, common sense, human nature, established history, only then will it be accepted. So you see, there was a sieve through which these narratives had to pass, and that is what made them confident. More than that, you'll also see that personally, I think there are about 96% or 95% of the narratives from the Prophet are what we call as rawayat bil ma'na, which means it is the understanding of the narrator which has been transmitted. And this is not just one narrator. The first narrator understood something, he passed it on to the second narrator, and then he understood something from the first, and it could have undergone some modifications or maybe some additions, and this remained until the compiler or the person who compiled the anthology, like Imam Bukhari or the rest were the ones who just recorded whatever reached them through 4, 5 or 6 sections. And the 4% I just talked about were other narratives which were transmitted verbatim, and these are of two types. So if you look at the supplications of the Prophet, so most of them are verbatim, and they are so beautifully transmitted. If you look at those verbatim translations and du'as and supplications, that, I mean, your heart leaps out, it springs forth to say, yes, only the Prophet could have said these words. Look at the du'a of going to bed. Allahumma aslamtu nafsi ilayk wa fajjahtu wajhi ilayk wa fawwaztu amri ilayk. I mean, these are so enchanting words that they are not only music to the ears, but they pin in themselves in your heart as well. So one of the verbatim sayings are these, which I just said, that they are the supplications of the Prophet that are very helpful. And the other are certain proverbial sayings of the Prophet, like he said, "Bu'istu li utammima al-akhlaq," that I have been sent to complete the pinnacle of morality. Or he said that inna min khayarikum ahasinakum akhlaqan, the best of you are those who are morally best. And similarly, you'll find so many one-liners from him. Because of the fact that they were one-liners, they were easily preserved in memory as well and transmitted. So these one-liners and these supplications, they are a very, very, I would say, profoundly effective repertoire and reservoir of some of the things that the Prophet said. And the remaining 95 or 96%, as I said, they reflect the ijtihadats of the Prophet, they reflect his life, the way he spent it. They also reflect the history of that era. They also reflect his attitude towards companions. For example, one thing that you can easily see if you look through this hadith literature is that he would address different companions regarding the same issue in different words. He knew that what was to be said to Abdullah ibn Umar and what was not to be said to, for example, Abu Zar, because he knew that although the question is the same, but the answer has to be given according to the understanding and capacity of the Sahabi in question. So this also shows his tremendous wisdom, how he dealt with his students who were the Sahaba. Similarly, we know also that there were so many things in which the Sahaba differed with him. I mean, especially when they got to know that this was something that was not from Wahi. So we know in the Battle of Badr that Habab ibn Munzir, he came forward because it was, in the Battle of Uhud, the prophetic army, the Prophet said that we will encamp at a certain place. And Habab came forward and asked the Prophet that, well, are you saying this out of your understanding, or is it God's guidance, it is Wahi that you are saying this? And the Prophet said, this is my opinion. So Habab said, well, if this is your opinion, then I beg to differ with you. This is not the right place that you have chosen. Instead of this place, because it has this and this and this demerit, let's go to that place. And the Prophet listened to him actually. Similarly, if you look at the Quran, you'll find the Prophet, the Sahaba, they knew that when they were differing in matters of non-Wahi, for example, in the case of the marriage of Zainab bint Jahash to Zayd ibn Harisa, the Prophet did not want Zayd ibn Harisa to divorce Zainab. And this is said in the Quran in very explicit words, is the hulu, when the words are like this, that amsik zawjak, that just don't divorce your wife, which is a very strongly worded sentence. But what happened? Zayd did not listen to him, and he ended up divorcing Zainab bint Jahsh because he knew that this was something of advice from the Prophet. And an advice is an advice. I mean, you can respectfully disagree with it also, which actually gives us this beautiful, I would say, stature and conduct of these people, that they knew that they could still differ with the Prophet if what he was saying was something that related to strategy. And I can add some more to this as well, but just to sum up, you see, a lot of these ijtihadats and happenings and history has been transmitted. Now, the thing is that what has caused this consternation and commotion is perhaps the fact that there was a stream, there was a period in the 3rd century when and scores of ahadith were concocted. They were fabricated. And because of this fabrication, there was a large scale, I would say, disparaging element that was added. And hence we see that the scholars of hadith, they rose up to this challenge. And what they did was, it was at this time that they actually came forth with these barometers and standards of judging hadith literature. And they said that, well, because of the fact that we are finding this large scale fabrication, that people are just narrating, and just to add stress and emphasis, they say that, well, this is something that has been said by the Prophet. And of course, what they would be saying would not be something very much against religion. It would be, I mean, something that was too fantastic and something that would urge people to do righteous deeds. Of course, these righteous deeds were overboard at times. So in order to restore that balance also, so these muhaddisun, they came forward. And I can tell you out of my own study, and I think every person who has studied hadith will tell you, that one of the outstanding disciplines which Muslims have invented, remember, this is a discipline which Muslims have invented. They are the pioneers of this, is the science of Rijal, the science of the biographies of narrators. So they've traveled vast areas in the first 3 or 4 centuries, because when they saw that people were ascribing things to the Prophet, and also there were people who were saying certain things, so they traveled far and wide, as far as Samarkand in the east, and then to Spain in the west, etc., to find out if there were people who were saying something, and they could evaluate it. So this is something that made them realize that, of course, on the one hand, we have a lot of treasure from the Prophet in the form of his du'as and supplication, in the form of the proverbial statements that he has made, in the form of his ijtihadat. But on the other hand, we have this large scale concoction. So I think it's just a question of being more attentive to narratives which are rightly reported, that can give you a lot of insight in how the Prophet conducted himself, how he made himself available to his people. And in fact, as we know from the Quran, that his seerah, his biography, his own biography, the Quran is one of the best reflections of his own biography. But hadith literature also has a lot to say about his character, about his conduct, the way he conducted himself. Because you see, the Quran is confined to a certain format, also a certain theme, a certain subject matter. So I've seen books of hadith of Quran that basically say that this is the seerah of the Prophet based on the Quran. So we will just have the Quranic seerah of the Prophet, which of course is something very valuable. A lot of people have written such tomes. But on the other hand, historical anecdotes, historical happenings that help us understand and navigate through many problems in life are ones that have come down in the form of indirect narrations, which mean that they are not the same wording that the Prophet said, but yes, they are the understanding of the ravis or the narrators. But as I said, that understanding is something about which these muhaddisun have also said. So this is a famous ascription to all the muhaddisun. They say that yahtamilu sidq wal kizb, about akhbarul ahad. They say that there is a probability that they can be correct, and there is a probability that they can be incorrect. So the thing is to properly evaluate them. So I think if they are properly evaluated, if these are hadiths that are spurious and inauthentic, they are sifted out. And by the way, this is one of the projects which Al-Mawrid has been conducting for the past 7 or 8 years. We've just published a book on hadiths, which is the narratives of the Prophet, just the first volume. And there are 3 other volumes coming up, which are those narratives which have been rejected, or they have been sifted out from these current collections, and the reasons have also been given, so that on the one hand we have a positive collection, which of course would be quite a voluminous collection, and on the other hand we'll have a collection, so to speak, which would be a negative collection, or it will be a list of narratives about which people would be, I would say, forewarned that these are inauthentically ascribed to the Prophet. But because of the fact that a lot of sermon givers, a lot of people who stand on the pulpit, they use all kinds of material to convey certain things. And because these have become very popular, but beware that they are not authentic. So that's another exercise that is being done. And we are not the first ones to do it. In the past, lots of scholars of hadith literature have done this, and they are still doing it. It's just a question of deeply understanding the pros and cons of these narratives. And I personally feel that the pros are much more than the cons, and it's just a question of judicially reading and accepting them.
Thank you so much.
Sir, can I say something? Thank you so much for such an illuminating answer. I asked this question because I started reading that book, Ilmun Nabi, Volume 1, of which has been published. And still, I feel that Hazrat Abu Bakr would definitely not wrongly attribute anything to the Prophet. And I also appreciate very much and thank you for the comment that we need to take the hadiths with a pinch of salt, which have been narrated in such large numbers. Thank you very much, sir. Such an illuminating and probably the longest answer you've given to any student so far. I'm honored. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.